You are listening to the Revolutionary Love and Resilience podcast. I'm Shelby Lee, and I am so honored to be here with you today. This podcast bridges the personal and professional, creating space for experts in the wellness and well-being fields to be both vulnerable and share their deep wisdom from their years of experience. This podcast weaves trauma awareness, inclusivity, and inspiration for every single person to be able to heal, grow, and become who they want to be, to step into their full authenticity and expand their capacity to claim their best lives as they journey through challenges towards revolutionary love and resilience. Welcome, Jessie. I am so happy that you're here. I was just feeling into my whole being around what inspired me about to get to know you more and to hear your story. And there's a way that every time we have connected, we've brainstormed, we've had coffee, we've been colleagues facilitating things together, where I feel like I am pulled into presence through being in your space, in connection with you. And it's such a gift how easy it feels to actually dive deep, to feel real with you, and to just allow myself to be fully authentic. There's something that you do that I am excited to share with all of our listeners here. No pressure. That really inspires me about the possibilities of how people can be in connection and be in the world. So welcome. I'm really glad you're here.
Wow. Thank you. That's a lot to receive off the bat, and I will take it. Yeah. I'm so honored to be invited into something that I know for you is really personal and heart inspired. And I only hope I can provide something meaningful. For you and your listeners.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and let's just see where it goes. I'd love to introduce you to this lovely audience. Everyone, Jessie Johnson works with corporate groups, nonprofits, and government agencies as an Equine Leadership Facilitator in Portland, Oregon, my hometown. His drive is to facilitate high-integrity leadership assisted by the social intelligence and partnership of horses. Working primarily with rescued mustangs, Jessie combines 20 years of work across the disciplines of athletics coaching, somatic therapy, and group dynamics to create fun and transformative experiences for leaders looking to raise consciousness and impact. Jessie also presents as a speaker and facilitator around socially intelligent leadership in human-only settings. He's from New England in rural Connecticut, and his personal journey involves coming to terms with privilege, playing small, and now leveraging power for the benefit of others. He enjoys regular running, bouldering, spending time with his partner, Clara, and their son, August. Jessie also produces the Super Givers podcast, an interview-based show giving platform to folks inspiring social change through innovative projects and viewpoints. Wow, that is a lot of things that you bring to the table, Jessie. Would you like to add anything?
That I bring to the table? Wow. If I'm showing up fully, I'm giving myself. I think the one thing I want to honor about myself is that I know that I have a genuine interest in cultivating my highest integrity for the benefit of the future ecology of the world and the social ecology. And I'm saying it that way because I think humanity is just a piece of the universe, and it's hard to know our impacts across millennia and across ecosystems. And so my attempt is let's see how far I can develop and leverage my own vibration into hopefully something life-serving.
What a beautiful kind of mission statement and intention. Thank you. On the topic of revolutionary love and resilience, because that's the topic of this podcast, I'd love to start by just hearing what that brings up in you. Like, what is revolutionary love and resilience in your definition and your life?
Well, I love your term, and if I'm just taking liberty to make it my own, is that cool?
Absolutely.
There's something about revolutionary love that seems to inspire the ability to get beyond ego, and just for me personally. So when I feel into revolutionary anything, there's a sense of higher calling, there's a sense of higher meaning, there's a sense of something outside of me that might benefit. So when I think of revolutionary love, I often think of tough parenting moments as like a sort of a real world example where it's totally inequitable in certain moments. Like my son might be beating me physically or using really, really abusive language. And it's, even if it's developmentally appropriate because he's really young, there's a sense of revolutionary love being the ability to hold space beyond the context of that interaction and to provide connection under the greater context that I'm supporting and facilitating a growing adult. And I don't always do that very well. And so maybe that's part of the resilience or the revolutionary. Can we have revolutionary self-compassion?
Yes.
Yeah, but I think of it being the ability to get past my agenda and my ego and to understand the highest level of good that can come from it. And I honestly, I don't know if this is where you want to go, but I engage with that, as I think a lot of us do on the daily right now, with when I get pulled into the divisiveness and the angst that is out there in the world, through social media or individual interaction or any of the ways that our kind of at oddsness shows up in the world. And I can get pulled right into this like righteousness place where I want to just like act against another force. So perhaps part of what's revolutionary love for me is the ability to stay in the place of higher vibration, the ability to stay in the place of higher self in those moments. And I have examples if you want to go into them, but there's my like starting riff.
Yeah. So that I love that you have examples, because part of what I'm curious about as you're talking about, it almost sounds like being, embodying so much love that there's an impact from the things that are happening outside of you, but you're able to stay connected to something in yourself that feels compassionate, revolutionarily compassionate. And I'm curious, like, what does that feel like in your body? What do you have to do in order to access that, or what have you had to do to cultivate that?
That would be a really helpful question for me to develop it. So thank you. And I would say just, for people, I'm sure most of your listeners don't know who I am. So let me just say, to be fair, I'm probably successful at this 1 out of 10 times. And it's a process. It's a practice, right? In those hard moments. And I think in the moments where I have been able to access it, it comes from the ability to regulate my center, to be able to stay within myself, and through breath, through the internal coach that can come in and say, there's something really important about holding space for this right now. And you don't have to know what it is. In fact, you can't allow for the mental bandwidth or the neocortex bandwidth, or else you're going to lose it, right? You're going to lose the ability to show up. So my body feels kind of like heightened. And I think I'm working through a certain amount of attachment wounding that gets triggered in certain interactions. So I have to really work hard to stay embodied, or I will give up. What I tend to do is give up my power. I tend to err on the side of over, kind of like martyring myself. And that's some of the stuff I'm working on personally. But I know when it's right and when it doesn't feel super activating, I need to just like call in space in my body.
I love this.
Slow down.
I love this concept of the internal coach. It sounds like a part of you that has the ability to show up, to guide you to a place where you can create space and you can engage with that, the activation in a way that feels helpful to you.
Yeah, that's critical for me. Yeah.
Yeah. What were those examples? Do they feel present still?
I'm only pausing because here's an example, right? In this moment, I'm wanting to trust that there's some part of me that's saying, okay, let's be conscious of how somebody could be affected if they're in this example and how I want to frame that. So, there was one time where somebody, I would say, sort of surprised me with feedback about me in a way that you could maybe label as like being a little bit inequitable, like they sort of trapped me in a sense. Those are kind of like intense words, so I'm just using them as shorthand. But in other words, like I didn't really have consent. It was like I'm gonna give you feedback, and then you're going to receive it. But there was no invitation to that. It just started happening, and I remember feeling. It's cool. There's no video or anything, so Clara's gonna just work quietly if that's all right.
Totally. Hi, Clara.
Shelby says hello. She's waving. And I had no context for why we were having a conversation. And then it started happening, and it sort of felt like the energy was happening on me, and it didn't feel great. And so I remember taking that in and sort of stumbling my way through the conversation, just reminding myself, like, do no harm, do no harm, do no harm, and then sort it out later. And in my quest and my study to understand how to show up in allyship with people, I got some other feedback when I shared the experience, and some people were saying, this is like, that's not okay. This person can't treat you like that. And I kept saying, there's something important about holding space for this target group. This person's a member of multiple target groups. And like, as somebody in an agent group, I can actually hold space for that and understand that I'm not used to that. I'm used to having it pretty easy. And this is what target group members go through all the time. And I want to grant this person a little grace to be maybe, admittedly, maybe a little bit sloppy, and understand that the real growth in this is that person is finding their voice and in a potentially really, really activating space for them. And that hopefully that gets refined over time, and then the confidence is there to bring more of that to the world, because that's probably more important than my little bit of activation in that moment. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. As you're talking, I think I'm getting a sense of the kind of presence that's needed and the kind of slowing down that's needed to be able to access the kind of wisdom that comes from this type of revolutionary love.
Yeah. And I'll give myself credit for holding that space, but also understand that I've gone back and forth into those states hundreds of times since then. And I go back and forth into this righteousness of like, oh, I'm going to bring my needs into it and give this person feedback on how their feedback went, and that's it's really hard to trust what is, what is the most serving to my well-being and this other person. I think it's just something humanity is dealing with.
I'm curious where resilience comes into this and how you would define resilience, maybe to somebody who had no idea what that word means.
Well, I would say on a basic level, the ability to process activating experiences and transform into resource.
And what would you mean by activating experience and resource?
Great. So activating experience, anything that takes our nervous system into a harder to live in place, right? You and I might say sympathetic response, or, use terms like fight, flight, or freeze. For me, that's a part of it. I'm sure we can have activation without going there as well. But something that takes our energy, right? That demands our bandwidth, that takes us out of our center. It could even show up as, wow, I was really grounded and focused on this project at work today. And then I read this article about politics and I can't concentrate. Like, that could be a form of activation. And the other piece was resilience.
What's a resource?
Resource. Yeah. Because I defined resilience. Resource would be, how do I translate that into something that recenters myself in the direction of whatever I care about, whatever I'm working on. I'm back to my organic self. I'm back to who I am, and I'm acting from that place. So resilience could, one form of resilience could be the ability to move through an experience of activation and into something of resource, something productive, something that's beneficial for myself, and hopefully others.
Yeah, I really appreciate that definition. It makes it very simple, and it's really powerful to look at it through this lens. I'm curious, you've already shared a bit about experiences you had in your life, and I just want to see, if you're willing, if there are any other stories from your life during a time that was maybe really hard, a time you wish you'd had access to revolutionary love and resilience.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of them. What would be the most helpful context, you think?
It could be, like what I just have to imagine as, a therapist and someone who offers leadership trainings, that most of us who are in this field came to it through a certain set of challenges, a certain set of pain or suffering, where we had to kind of find our way through and to awaken. And then generally that's what inspires us to do the work we're doing. And I'm curious if there's anything in that field that sparks your interest, your stories.
I think it starts with my relationship to my mom, which was fairly rocky for most of it. And by most of it, I don't mean like, we definitely had, it was very rocky for the formative years and really defined a lot of my attachment challenges, especially relating with women, early on in my life. I mean, and probably still, hopefully in lesser ways. Maybe you can, my wife's smiling. And so I think back to some of the pain that I inflicted on myself and my mom. Even when I was a kid, there was something happening where I felt a lot of shame around her presence. So for me, that would have been like, I was really into music and athletics. And at some point, I actually requested, probably not very respectfully, that my mom not come to my athletic events. And I remember that really hurting me. And, I think she handled it pretty well, pretty maturely. But I think that's where it started for me.
And as you're kind of recalling this now, what do you notice? What's happening inside in your body,
Well, there's a
your
little
heart?
there's a little bit of tension in my low back, and there's also a curiosity. I'm sort of asking myself, what happened? Because your mom loved you, and she was really great. And in no way do I want to ever say that I had a rocky childhood or my parents weren't great. I had amazing parents, and my mom certainly was that as well. And we had some incredible repair in my adulthood before she passed away. And so I just think back to that and wish that your question was, where do I wish I would have had that resource of revolutionary love? And that would have been then, because I wish we could have been more connected, and I wish I could have gotten through whatever I needed to at a younger age so that we could have really had more time to deepen our relationship.
I'm so glad to hear that you had a repair. That sounds like such a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say a moment of revolutionary love that came out of that. So maybe here's a little resilience example is when I met my now wife. We were like maybe a month into dating, and I felt this attachment fear come up. I had to work through a lot of fear of abandonment, betrayal, distrust that I sort of played out in prior relationships prior to meeting my wife. And I remember I was just like really open and sobbing on my apartment floor. And I called my mom and I was like, we like, you and I we have to repair this, because I can't lose this person. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, I can't even imagine how many people in the world wish they could do that or had the courage to do that, or that was available to them. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. And that's all credit to my mom for being open and available for that. And she's just like, yeah, been here waiting for that. She was absolutely the adult in this whole time, and finding my way back to her in that service was an incredible experience of healing and repair that most definitely influences my process of giving and wanting to support harmony in the world.
I keep hearing you use the word attachment, and it's so pertinent to this conversation around revolutionary love and resilience, especially for folks who maybe have some complex trauma, some developmental trauma. And I'm just curious, if you could describe a little bit more what you mean by attachment, and how looking through that lens has maybe helped inform your own healing process.
I guess I mean attachment with regard to how I learned about relationship and safety and security in relationship, primarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're describing that we do what we learned how to do when we were little,
right?
When we were developing, that when we create this attachment experience, or it's created with us included, that we do that until we learn another way, really consciously. And it sounds like there was a moment for you, or probably many, where you wanted to learn to do it differently.
Yeah.
And through that came some sense of revolutionary love and resilience. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. And my hope is that we all have that innate drive for secure attachment, that part of our job as practitioners is to really cheerlead and facilitate the space for that secure piece to come forth and either rehabilitate or develop, or whatever that person's journey is. Right. For me, it was all, fortunately, the wounding and the repair took place with largely the same person in my mom. And other people I know have different experiences. But I feel like the greatest gift my mom gave me was to hang in there and deal with this, little obnoxious, kid slash teenager slash even young adult. She stayed there, and that's revolutionary love. She's hung in there knowing that, I'm a parent, and I love my son, and I want him to grow up into a healthy adult who has great relationships. And she was able to hang in there until I caught up to her and found out what I needed.
Wow. I just noticed I am feeling so touched by that kind of transformation, and it gives me hope for my own story. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's on my heart because my mom passed 2 years ago, quite suddenly. And so I practiced a lot of gratitude for the time we had, and the trajectory that we were able to complete or just travel,
Yeah. You mentioned, as clinicians, part of what we're doing is hopefully helping people find secure attachment. And I'm curious if you can share a little bit about how you do that in your work. Secure attachment, resilience, love.
Well, most of my work now is with the leadership lens. And I think all of those underlying beautiful human relational elements are still there. So I feel grateful that I've come to this work through the avenue of transpersonal psychology, and somatic psychology, and attachment psychology. And when I was primarily a counselor, I think I would see the work with the client as the attachment work being more figural. And now I look at it as being sort of like along for the byproduct of the work that I do. So the amazing thing about working with horses is that it's innately healing attachment because of their sensitivity and the way that they show up. We are like automatically, even if that's not the focus, and that's not the focus of what my clients come in with, but who can't benefit from like more secure attachment work, right? So what can happen with horses is that we get this oxytocin boost, and we get this incredible, loving, sensitive presence from them because they are non-predatory animals that live in the wild and in herds. And so their social intelligence is so finely tuned through their neurophysiology that they can sense us up to a mile away, and they know exactly how to read our nervous system and our emotional state. They don't have the terms we have for emotions are human construct. They're all just sensations that are founded in our physiology, right? And so what they read is the congruence of that physiology, and that's how they sense into whether we're trustworthy, or whether we might want them for dinner, or whether we're a friend. And humans are an incredible partner with horses because we have both predatory and non-predatory pieces to us. And so there's this incredible dual healing that happens with humans and horses because they pull the best of our non-predatory selves out in leadership and connection and relationship, because we can only garner their participation and cooperation through really congruent intentionality. And otherwise they'll sense that. And yes, you can force and you can dominate. And that's largely what human history in working with horses has encompassed for various reasons. And now we have the bandwidth and the consciousness to form a different level of interspecies experience. So I know I'm going a little bit beyond, but I think in response to your question about attachment, the ability to show up in a ring with a horse and become present with yourself and regulate your breathing, all of that is necessitated in order for relationship to happen with them. So their clients are often really motivated to get there, even if they don't have all these clinical words on it. We're just like, they're coming into themselves because they want to have relationship. So we can start to understand and help them become aware of where that impulse comes from, where that desire comes from. And then we almost work backwards into the attachment healing from that. And we don't even ever have to use any of those words. It's just happening, right? Yeah.
I'm lighting up as you're describing this. I love the word congruence. That feels like I can feel it in my own body just settling as you're talking about it. And, I'm a horse girl. I grew up in that other culture of, dominating horses. I mean, that wasn't how I related so much, but that's how I was taught. And I have found that for my own resilience, if I hadn't had horses in my life to go breathe with, be with, interact with, relate every single day, that I probably would have had way less resilience than I did to get through. There was something their sensitivity offered me in those incredibly challenging times. So I'm just really appreciating the way you're describing it, because I've never heard it described like that before.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any client stories that you are able to share where somebody came in who maybe had a pretty challenging background, or they're really activated in their nervous system, or kind of overwhelmed, and found what you're talking about through the work with the horses?
Yeah. I mean, there's little bits of that almost every time. So I'm trying to think of something that would be easily translatable. Let's see. Well, I'm thinking of one client, and I think I'm choosing this one because it may be in line with the themes that you're working with and your listeners are interested in. This client is working on the right to have their space in the world and have their needs be as honored and relevant as others' needs. And when they started working with our horses, the horses basically would not pay much attention. Right. And so this client had to sit in the pain of like, this is what happens. Like, I don't matter. I just cede ground and I'll work around what you're doing. Right. I'll just be okay. I'm smiling, but inside I'm really hurting. And so we had to work on owning the congruence of that pain as a pathway towards what happened this week, which was, I have a right to stand here and set boundaries and invite you into relationship. Because boundaries, my perspective is that boundaries are designed to maximize contact. And a lot of people, especially, I think we have sort of a codependent norm in our culture. A lot of people view boundaries as being like painful rejection of contact or just like non-existent. And so this client had never really known their own boundaries and how to access them as a means towards better connection. And so we had this beautiful moment where all I had them do is stand in the middle of the ring, and the horse was just ignoring them, like sitting in the corner, as has happened several times in these sessions. And they were able to really just embody the desire and just breathe into it. And after maybe 5 breaths, the horse picked her head up, turned around, and walked right over and put her head right next to her head. Whereas before, the horse had either ignored or like was butting the client, which is also like, could be interpreted as like, hey, get in your body, get here. I need to feel you, right? Which we know the human version of that, right? When we don't feel somebody and we can sort of like do things to get them to show up.
Yeah.
The horse was actually like mirroring that, from like pushing my client around the ring to the point where I was worried that the client might be a little bit at risk because the horse was getting kind of aggressive. And that's just a feedback for the client. And so the client was able to step back, stand in the body and breathe and invite just without any words, just with intention and breath. And then they had this beautiful exchange where there was actually respect and connection.
Wow, that sounds so powerful. And it sounds like both the horse and the human were working with boundaries and embodiment. And what a cool dance.
Yeah.
I love that you brought back in embodiment. I'm so curious because being able to really be in our bodies, to experience resilience, to experience revolutionary love is, for me, the foundation of all of this. That's the gold. That's enlightenment, essentially. And I'm wondering if you have any practices that you'd like to share with us, that you can guide us through, that help us come more into contact with our bodies, with this security you're talking about, the secure attachment or resilience or revolutionary love, anything that you've shared with us today. And if not a practice, just any words of wisdom of how others might be able to tap into this in their own bodies.
Yeah, I pull back from any sort of practice, maybe because I don't give myself, that expertise. And I think that you're more specialized in that. But I would say with whatever practice you're working on, well, okay, so if you're working on a practice, you're already probably there, right? In some way of bringing in embodiment. I don't know what I have to add to that, Shelby. Do you mean like if somebody's just not even practicing at all or or it's hard to be in their body?
Yeah. Somebody who is maybe struggling and like wanting to heal, wanting to start moving towards resilience or revolutionary love, and maybe really activated, really overwhelmed, kind of lost. How could they start orienting towards
Well,
this?
and as you know, especially for people who have been conditioned to find being in their bodies as not safe, that we want to first honor that is a really powerful response that your body is giving you, and that's the first step. and I will say with this client that I'm using as an example, it's taken a couple years to be able to acknowledge sensation. And some of what I've learned is to really trust just the incremental in that process. So this client experiences a lot of like pressure with being asked to be in their body. And so I would just say, whatever your practice is, let's try to start with self-compassion. And it is not an achievement that has to happen. There is no comparison. Even just the desire and the intention to be with yourself is enough and is a beautiful starting point. There's no Olympics here that you're trying to get to. There's no competition on Facebook or something. Because I would argue that without that self-compassion, it could not be that productive. It could turn into some sort of, self harm in a way. I don't know. I'd be curious on your thoughts on that, but those are heavy words to use, but hopefully that lands.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I just feel like you mentioned that, because I would never want anyone to feel like they need to go into their body now in order to get to where they want to go. It's starting where you are. And it's really important to acknowledge that not all of us feel safe in our bodies.
Yeah.
So starting with self-compassion is gold. And that's where I started. And it really works. It really helps. I think our internet's off.
Yeah, I think we're all right. Hold on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little choppy. Well, let me see if I can maybe turn this off. Let's see. If I turn my internet browser off, will that turn my Zoom off? It might. Let's see.
I don't think so.
Okay. It operates.
You could also turn our videos up.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, that looks better.
Okay.
Seems good.
All right.
I wonder if I should say that again.
Go for it.
Okay. I'm just so grateful that you shared that, because it's so important to honor that not all of us feel safe in our bodies. And so if we have any kind of agenda of forcing that, it's going to make it even worse. We're going to become even more activated. And so starting with self-compassion is exactly where I started. And that was the only route that helped me eventually start moving towards feeling even open to the possibility of coming into my body. And so to me, that's a perfect practice to offer. Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to say, as a kind of a cheerleading towards this, that being in the body and mindfulness and meditation is really ubiquitous in our culture. And there's a lot of people that come at it from different angles. And it can feel like social pressure in a way, that you're missing something, but not everybody gets to the heart of why it's important. And it's certainly, you don't have to take my word for it. My perspective on why it's important is what I want to share as an encouragement. And this comes out of the equine work, is that our bodies really never lie. And there's incredible wisdom and power in the feedback that we can get from even the smallest sensation. And I don't think that's really been supported, at least not in the Western culture that I grew up in, that we're often steered away from our bodies as a source of power and wisdom, when actually most of what we need is always there. And so the impetus to be in our body is not because it's cool and chic and the trend of this decade. It's because you can be incredibly true to yourself when you can be connected to whatever degree feels safe and welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. That feels really important. That is gold. There's so much permission in there to be where we're at instead of what we're conditioned by and all of those shoulds that plague so many of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like there are 1,000 topics we could travel together over, and we probably will in the future. But I just want to thank you so much. And I'm really curious how people can find you and your work.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you're welcome to go to supergivers.com. That is the landing spot for all my work. You'll find my podcast, connections to my offerings as a facilitator and speaker, and you're welcome to find me through there. And at this point, you're welcome to email me as well and just ask questions. I want to be really accessible and helpful and giving. And the ethos of Super Givers is about creating mutual benefit, commonwealth benefit through service, and how leadership can actually benefit the greater good in addition to ourselves. So I'm practicing that by being really available. I'm practicing that through my podcast, and you're welcome to reach out and say hello and ask questions or engage in any way that feels useful.
Wow. Thank you so much. I love the name of that, and it's easy to remember. I just really want to honor you for sharing your stories about your mom and around attachment and all of that, and for bringing this incredible body of work that you're offering to the world with that incredible intention behind it. So I'm truly honored that you're here sharing that with all of us today.
Thank you so much, Shelby. It's you're very welcome, and I am also honored to have the space to show up and provide what I can.
Great.
Thank you for offering and inviting and providing this amazing space to learn about revolutionary love and resilience.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much for being part of this show and being part of this love revolution. If you love this podcast, please share it with your people and leave a 5-star review so that we can get the word out. If you're a practitioner or on your own healing journey, head on over and check out creatingsaferspace.com, which is one of my passion projects and is open for enrollment now. You'll get access to it the moment you sign up. Or join my mailing list for all sorts of revolutionary love and trauma-aware support at shelby-lee.com. See you next episode.